Well, shall we get this show on the road?
Sure.
Welcome everybody to our third in the series, Historians Imagine. Forgive the sound. We've been trying to navigate this for a bit. I think if everybody mutes themselves while each person speaks, that might help us a little bit. I'm Kurt Gutjahr. I'm the managing director at the Center of the American West. We are thrilled to have this series. As Matt was speaking when we were welcoming people to into the virtual room, we have Kate Carpenter to thank for driving us to creating this series. This series came out of a conversation that Matt and Patty had at the Western History Association on creativity. And Kate Carpenter came to us, she's a graduate student at Princeton, and said, you should really package that and take that show on the road. So we have done just that. We've had, this is our third with Jenny Price. We have two more coming up, Phil Deloria on May 12th and Natalia Molina on June 9th. I want to give you a couple pieces of housekeeping for this event. So this event takes place in two parts. The first part will take place in this virtual webinar space, and we will look at the Q&A and observe it, but we have a separate Q&A session in a Zoom room where you will all be able to actually ask your questions in virtual person. And that link is on the answered questions in the Q&A. It is posted right there, so you can just join us. Please feel free to join us at 1 o'clock in that room, and that session will go on for half an hour. This session is being recorded, so if you know of people who were not able to make it that really wanted to, it will be up on our website next week. But of course, the Q&A session will not. We will just retain that for our folks here. I want to give a big shout out to the staff at the Center of the American West, who've done a great job of promoting it, got us a fantastic audience for this event and all of our events. I also wanted to give a highlight. We have a couple other events in a different series. It's the Bipartisanship and Friendship Happen series. So tomorrow afternoon at 12 noon, Patty will be in conversation with CU President Mark Kennedy and UMass President Marty Meehan. They both served in Congress from different sides of the aisle. They will be talking about bipartisanship, their relationship in Congress, but also be talking about higher education and some of the challenges it faces today. And then we have two more in that series coming up. On May 10th, we have Colorado's Democratic Congresswoman Diana DeGette in conversation with Michigan Republican Congressman Fred Upton. And then on May 21st, Colorado's own Democratic Congressman David Skaggs will be in conversation with Republican Congressman Scott McGinnis. You can, oh, and Jenny's glasses just broke, just right on cue. You can find out information about all that at our website, www.centerwest.org. You can register for that. And I think without further ado, I will turn this over to Patty and our crew.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, all of the hordes who are joining us, and how much we would love to have you in person and, well, some other day. So I am so fortunate to live in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm so fortunate that Matt Jacobson was born and raised in Boulder, Colorado, and I got to know his dad. So that's how Matt and I ended up with the session at the Western History Association. And Boulder, Colorado is not the center of the universe in any sense at all, but it was sort of the center of your universe, Matt, for a phase there. So how fortunate to have met you and to have this chance, and to have Kate Carpenter push us to go further with that. And how wonderful to have the talent pool that we have on creativity in the practice of history. So we are really fortunate to have Jenny Price. And because we are going to talk about her career, we kind of skipped the part of the introduction, because many of you already know about her, but also the whole point of having you here is to review so much of her work. So I will not be doing the bio, but there's Jenny. Jenny does extraordinary things with history, and she really does them. She doesn't just think that she might do them, and she recruits others into it. So some of you may know this already. I'm sure you probably do, but it seems really important to show a Jenny Price project in action. So we are going to start with a short video, a little bit close to 3 minutes or so, just so anybody who seems to have been, well, it could happen to anyone. You may have been living under a rock and you may not know what Jenny Price does out in the world. So we're going to show you this video so you can see what happens when Jenny has an idea and works with others and puts it into action. Here we go.
So before we begin ranging the wilds of our urban habitat today, I'd like to ask, do any of you here today have any previous experience in urban mountaineering?
The ascent up Bunker Hill and back is 1.25 miles. We're going to traverse canyons, caves, switchbacks, meadows, passes, and peaks. What else do you see?
My bank.
Your bank. What's your bank?
U.S. Bank.
U.S. Bank. What else do you see?
Citibank.
Citibank. We're now in Banker Canyon. Okay?
Welcome to McGuire Garden. This is really a refuge or an oasis nestled deep in the Banker Canyons.
It's what? Public. Most people seem to think this is public, McGuire Gardens.
What do we mean by the term public space?
Does this look like public space?
How about this?
That meadow is public land with a private lease, with a public easement on the private lease, with private security and maintenance.
Often what's public and what's private in these spaces is really, really complicated, and you can't always tell.
In essence, we use this de facto as a public space, but we really don't have as many rights here.
Does this look like public space?
Well, this is a very special location because this is one of the few places where we can actually get under the undergrowth of infrastructure that separates the LA River from downtown Los Angeles. So savor this space. It's a special one. Let's walk down towards the river. Los Angeles exists because of the LA River. For 130 years, the river was the sole source of water for the citizens of Los Angeles. So the river is absolutely linked to Los Angeles, its culture, and its people. According to the city, in order to be in this space, you technically need to have a waiver. Access to the river is so important. We can't appreciate the river until we actually can be at the river. So the more work we can do to get folks down to the river, see the river, experience the river, the better.
We hope you go forth from this hike, understanding that while the various landscapes we encounter on a daily basis largely shape our behavior, that we too can play an active role in shaping our cities.
Well, it happened again, Jenny. When I watched that the first time, it made me cry. And Jenny said that no one else has ever cried before over that video. And it happened again. It happened again. And I think I tried to monitor it this time. I think it's because of the intense interest that the public participants have in what's going on there, and the earnestness of the urban rangers in conveying understanding and background and so on. So look at that. I wasn't sure if that was going to happen again, but we have evidence that you got me again. I don't understand why other people don't cry during this. That's just going to be mystifying to me. So I would like you to take off from this video. I'll pull myself together here. A handkerchief in case I need that. So, and you can express amusement and surprise that I am weeping over here, or you can just move on. Why don't you talk about the origins of this particular program, the Urban Rangers program, and lead from that to the crossing of different arenas and platforms that has been your story. That you have, thank heavens, you have books, old-fashioned things called books. You have those. It's really nice. But you just are so unbounded in the channels and routes of access to an audience. So tell us about the Urban Rangers and then sketch out this bigger picture of you and your capacity to go from arena to arena to arena without seeming to be anything but brave and happy.
Thanks, Patty. Yeah, and most people laugh; they don't cry. That's okay. I'm glad we're sort of equal parts ironic and sincere, and I'm glad that you kind of responded to the sincere part. So the LA Urban Rangers is one of many rabbit holes that I've fallen down in my career. Probably the biggest rabbit hole. It really reshaped my career in many ways, and it's a group that I accidentally co-founded. It was Emily Scott's original idea. She had this idea to do this project for a show that was about LA Environment, a collective show. Emily Scott, many of you may know her, the great Emily Scott, who now teaches at University of Oregon. And we did this, the co-founders are Emily and Therese Kelly and Sarah Delighten. And we basically what we decided to do is we deputize the ranger identity and all of the trappings, all of the language and all of the visual, icons. And we take all that wonder and curiosity that people take out to Yellowstone and Yosemite, like what's the geology? What are the birds, whatever. And we kind of ask questions about the places where people live. And what we have found is that the ranger is a really great character for talking about nature and public space in the way that I did in other ways, but I'll talk about that in a sec. So, because when you see that hat, right, I don't think were we wearing our big hats? I can't remember. But when you see that hat, you think, okay, that's a person that knows is an expert on nature, and that's the guardian of America's great public spaces. So it turns out to be a fabulous character to perform, to totally screw around with people's ideas of nature, and to totally, and to sort of really claim public spaces that have been privatized. So we did the one in the video is we had a big project called Public Access 101 downtown LA. The first project in that series was actually on the Malibu beaches. And so what it does really, the way I would explain it, and it just introduced me to a completely different format that really kind of sent me down the path of seeking out new formats and being open to new formats. And what it does is, like, if I were to take people to downtown public spaces or down to a Malibu beach, and I would say, oh my God, look at this, these people are, I would explain it, right? And I would say, these beaches are actually public, but those folks are privatizing it, and these are all the ways they do it. And I would explain it, and I would kind of lecture. And the difference, or if I were to write about it as an historian, right? And the difference here is that these are kind of what people call social practice projects, is that we're creating kind of a story that people can inhabit. So it's experiential. We never say, oh my God, those stupid people, look at the ways that they're preventing you from using your public spaces. We never say that. We just kind of create a story and kind of perform a story that people can enter and inhabit, where we say, where they can both experience the problematic stories that we tell about those spaces, but also experience new stories. So they can experience the Malibu public beaches as public spaces, which was actually really, really hard to do down there. They can experience the just craziness of the lack of public space in downtown Los Angeles. So that's how I sort of think of the difference in terms of the format. It's a difference between sort of lecturing, and really just kind of creating a story that people can walk into enjoying, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And if you all had been wearing hats, I would have fallen apart. I'd be sobbing.
Yeah, no, we have the big hat.
I'm glad I didn't see that, or I would never have pulled myself together to. But I think one of the things I'm so moved by is the making fun of the Park Service, but in such an affectionate way. And usually, maybe in our times especially, but when people make fun of something, that the warmth and good nature aspects seem anemic. So that is, you do the warmth and good nature thing. Is that conscious strategy, or is that just what you do?
Well, it's partly guided by the ranger character, right? The ranger character is a very warm, good-natured character. And so I would say two things about it. One is that this is definitely a character for us, the LA Urban Rangers, is that it's an ironic take on the National Park Rangers. It's also a very sincere take on the ranger. We're sort of like rangers, and we do what rangers do. We ask questions, and we're incredibly interested in what we do, and we're open-minded, and we want everybody to join us, and we like to explore and go out. So, there are a lot of really wonderful things about that tradition, even though we're sort of critiquing it at the same time, that we also adopt. So, but also it's, sometimes I would get a little frustrated because, I'm not a particularly always kind, good-natured, person. I mean, I tend to be I tend to be more like feisty, right? And I want to like argue, which is in the tone that's in some of my other work. But when you put on that hat, and when I'm Ranger Jenny, it was actually really, it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot because I couldn't be feisty. I had to be really, really nice, even when homeowners were screaming at us on the beaches of Malibu. And it actually, when I went on to do a very different project, which was the Our Malibu Beaches app, which wasn't a ranger project, but was also a project that basically gives you all the information you need to know to use a Malibu beach. being Ranger Jenny really informed the tone of that app. That I think the tone of that app was actually quite different from having already performed, Malibu Public Beach Access as Ranger Jenny. So it's actually been really, really interesting to be Ranger Jenny.
So Ranger Jenny, if I might just for a moment here, but I want to quote Matt, because in a moment I'll hand the baton over to him, that he referred to the Rangers Project as an inside joke that everyone is in on, which is kind of different from most inside jokes. And then I want to set him up for questions he's going to ask now. The New York Times this morning has a review of a book by a person, Jenny Diskey, so she has your first name, but her book is called Why Didn't You Just Do What You Were Told? And I thought, well, now there's a good transition to that. So now I shall hand off to Matt for a bit here.
Great, well, thanks. So as a way of kind of bridging our way from present to past, let me just add one more question about the Urban Rangers. I'm really curious, to what extent did that project mobilize research you had already done? I mean, you've written quite a lot about the place of the environment in American thought and experience, and you can see that in the even in the short clip that we saw. And so how much did it mobilize what you had already done as a scholar, and how much did it require of you to do further research and to learn new things that you'd never really thought about? Yeah,
it's actually a great question. On the one hand, what it really mobilized was because we were the four of us all had full-time jobs. This was very much a side project that we had to squeeze in. We actually based it on work that I had already been doing on the Malibu beaches. So we already knew a lot about access and the laws and all that. In terms of really building on my training as a historian, and I really feel like every project, no matter how goofy looking, that I've ever done since I left graduate school is that's really the strong foundation for me, is my training as an historian. I think I didn't realize, like, it was definitely built, and I think Emily too is an art historian, and it came out of her desire to do this, really came out of her critique of, kind of humanities critique of, she had been a park ranger in Utah and Alaska, and it came out of her critique. So, but I think it wasn't until I actually had to start giving talks, about the Rangers, that I really thought about the logic of the character and just how it worked. We were just kind of using that logic. I think Emily had thought about it more, but I hadn't really fully understood until I actually had to explain to people why it was effective to take people down to the Malibu beaches and do public easement potlucks and have skills enhancing activities for how to find and use public beach in Malibu, because this is not beach going 101. And it wasn't until I had to sort of think through the logic that I realized that it was actually also when we had designed the project, all of us brought things to it from our fields, and what I think a lot of what Emily brought too was this understanding of the meanings of the Park Service and the traditions of the Park Service, and how all that plugs into American identity and all that. Does that sort of address what you were asking?
Yeah. I was just curious. Yeah, thank you. So we're taking a pretty circuitous route here. We're going to wind our way back to your most recent book in a minute, but first we're going to jump backward in time to the other side of graduate school, and just can you just talk a little bit about what you were reading, what classes you were taking, who your mentors were, whenever it was. It could have been grade school, high school, college, whenever, that you started to think that being a historian might actually be a thing for you, and that could be a vehicle that you could really ride your passions with.
So I think actually that's a great question, because no, absolutely not until the last semester of college. I was a bio major. I was a girl birder, a girl ornithologist. And I always wanted to be a writer though. And, now that you say that, I realize that was the biggest rabbit hole I've ever jumped down, is when I was looking just for an easy course. I was going to take pass fail my last semester in college. And I ended up taking a 20th century social history course from Gary Gerstle, the great Gary Gerstle. And it was the first time he'd ever taught. I think it was the first course he'd taught. And I had not planned to, I was trying to finish my senior thesis, which was about the ecology and social behavior of the white-winged trumpeter, And, so I didn't plan to spend any time. And I think I ended up with an A+ or something, because I spent so much time, because I was just totally blown away. was just totally blown away by the way that Gary was asking questions by the methods of history. And I didn't really understand why, but I remember thinking, wow, like liberty doesn't just have one meaning, like people can co-opt that. That was like a big insight for me, which sounds probably obvious to a lot of people who were seniors at that time, when I was an undergrad. But for me, that was a big, and so I fell in love with history, and my parents were like, what? My father was a big history buff. He's like, you've never been interested. And I said, well, I'm going to go to graduate school because I'm graduating. It's the only way I can figure out why I'm blown away. So I'll just go for a couple of years. And they thought I was nuts. So it was just, I'm an accidental historian in some ways too, just like being an accidental artist. But that was definitely the biggest rabbit hole. That just completely changed my life and my career.
Mm-hmm. At the time that you were making that decision to go to graduate school, did you understand the connection between the kind of history you wanted to do and your interest in the trumpeter swan?
Oh, in white-winged trumpeters? Yeah, it's an Amazonian bird species. How could you get that wrong, Matt? White-winged trumpeters.
I'm a historian.
Yeah, I mean, not really. I think when I went, I ended up going to study with Bill Cronin, which is the reason I didn't just stay 2 years. I actually stayed there. He's probably one of the few people who could have kept me in grad school because our interests were so aligned, and he was so supportive of someone who was honest from the beginning that I wasn't going to go into academia probably. My whole committee was. I was extremely fortunate. But no, I thought I was going to do some kind of materialist kind of history. And again, it took me a while to figure out that what I'm really, really interested in is how people think. And I kept writing these papers, and Bill kept saying, you sure you don't want to, pursue this? This seems to be what you're, no, I'm going to write like the next changes in the land. But no, it turned out that what I was really, and by the time I really figured out that I was really interested in cultural history, I know Anne Fabian's on here, she was a big influence. It was too late. I'd basically taken all my courses and I hadn't taken that much. I'd taken no real cultural theory courses. I'd taken some cultural history. So it was kind of self-taught at that point. Yeah.
We're going to wind our way back to the work that you did in graduate school and after, because there is a close connection between that early work and your most recent work. But we wanted to make sure and foreground this most recent book of yours and give you a chance to rant a little bit. So let me pass it back to Patty, and we can talk about your most recent book.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing though about that rabbit hole? Is that it's not just that, Gary was amazing, which he was. It was that while I was studying white-winged trumpeters, I climbed up a palm tree to look into the nest right at the end of my study. I took a year off. I was down there for a long time. And I fell and I destroyed my knee. Turns out permanently, I destroyed my knee. And I think that's what set me up to realize how interested in history was, and that I was kind of a born historian anyway, is that for the first time in my life, I didn't think that the future was what I made it. For the first time in my life, I felt like there were constraints on the future and that the past constrained the future. And I really feel strongly that it was because I fell out of that damn palm tree that I became an historian and ultimately had the career that then allowed me to have the career.
Interesting. That is really interesting. I see that tie, and I have to tell you, I was on a Zoom call with the good citizens of Elko, Nevada yesterday with 3 public officials, and they all had some story like that. So I am just overcome with yes, no, to a person. No, actually, no, they all had something where physical injury had been a big part of turning things around. So I'm living a thematically connected life in ways that I guess I'm grateful for. So I do want to ask if I go back to that phrase, why didn't you do just what you were told? It seems like that doesn't really apply to you because you were told to do things, and they were things that you were already doing and that you wanted to do. And I'm wondering if you have any advice. We do have a good share of young scholars who participate in this. Could you tell these young scholars what to do to end up in such an excellent state of mentorship? How can a young scholar attract the mentor that will say, do what you're doing and do it more and do things we haven't even thought of? What did you do to bring that on? That is not I have to tell you this, Jenny, it's not everyone's experience in graduate school.
Really?
Really?
I wasn't aware. mean, I chose going to study with Bill Cronin was kind of a no-brainer because there were very few people doing environmental history at that time. And it just seemed like a really good fit. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, the first thing I would tell graduate students is don't do what I did. Don't follow me. I actually don't think my career should be a mile. I mean, I've been broke most of my life, there have been way too many months where I wasn't sure how I was going to pay the rent. But I would say once I was in graduate school, I actually picked my committee very carefully. There were people I had worked with who I really had a lot of respect for and still do, but did not choose them because I knew they weren't that interested in writing. And they might be more interested in making sure that, someone that they were putting that kind of time to was going to follow their footsteps into academia. So I chose my committee very, very carefully, and they weren't necessarily all the people that I had worked with the most. But they were people who were all interested in writing, who were all just, to find, especially in the early 90s, in the late 80s, to find, to have a department where you could find 4 people in one department. My committee was Bill Cronin, Ann Fabian, John Demos, and Howard Lamar. And it was just, they were just amazing, because my dissertation, Flight Maps, ended up, I really wanted to write it in a way that would allow me to segue out of academia, that would allow me to not be an academic. It did everything a dissertation is supposed to do. It just didn't read like a dissertation. And to find, especially back then, 4 people in one department who were, hugely supportive of that and said, okay, show us what that looks like, and then we'll see. And then we're really supportive. I'm just, I'm still grateful. And in fact, I read their dissertation report afterwards, and every one of them you could see was aimed at the other people in the department, at the deans who might actually and said, like, I know this is a really unusual dissertation. However, this is why you should take it seriously. So, I was just really fortunate. I think it would still be hard to find people in one department who would support someone like me, some weirdo like me.
Yeah. And yet the choose by temperament and then bring people along. I'm sure not a member. I know Bill, I knew him for a long time. He had never said a word to me about pink flamingos. In the many years I knew him, he never said that. So choose the people with temperament and then say, how about pink flamingos? And see how that goes. So, but leaving the flamingos, we'll come back. Oh, we're coming back to flamingos. But heaven's sake, a release on Earth Day, is that right? Coming up
Tuesday. Earth Day.
So,
yeah, Earth Day. So, it's been ready since end of January, but Earth Day week. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is it seems like it's completely consistent with what you do, because it is saying to people, here are some assumptions you've been making, and you might want to think more closely about them. But the tone seems different in that in other places, like flight patterns, it's sort of, here are some things you took for granted that you probably shouldn't be taking for granted. This is more, would you just quit taking those things for granted? Could you just cut that out when you take, maybe this is a bad, that was me going back to improvisational theater to pretend that I was representing your point of view on this one, but this is a somewhat different tone. And you yourself, I think you said to us that this is a book that is written in a manner that's quite different from most authors. It's for people not to like it.
Yeah, for sure. So it's really different in ways, but in some ways it's the same. So I feel like, first of all, for all of you out there, stop saving the planet. I'm begging you. But, in some ways I feel like I've had I'm one of those scholars I never wanted to be one of these people, but I'm one of these people who's ended up having essentially one idea that's driven almost all of my projects in my entire career. And that is this, looking at this, how people think about nature as this world out there, and then how that is, problematic, and how it, I've looked at how it shapes cities, how it shapes nature writing, how it shapes environmentalist strategies, but it always comes back to that. And I actually did not think that this book was going to be about that. And when I realized it was, I was like, oh, damn, it's the same goddamn, thing. But so in some ways, it's like the same thing I've been doing. That's what the LA Urban Rangers talk about in a lot of ways too. But it's also really, really different from anything I've ever done in tone. I've always tried to find a tone where people will like me. Ideally, if I can get them to like me, it's always like, let's think about this. Let's sit down and think about this together. And I do this too. So I've always made myself the fall guy, I made a lot of really, really different decisions about this book, right? Any book, as we all know, is a set of decisions, right? About voice and tone and structure and what audience you're trying to. And one of the first decisions, you're right, Patty, that I made is that not everyone's going to like this one. And the point, I forgot to turn off my phones, I'm sorry. That the point of this book is not to necessarily have people like it. In fact, this book will not be successful unless there are a lot of people out there who don't like it. Hopefully all you out there will like it. I think you're not the audience I'm talking about. But also, it's super short. It's almost pure ideas. I was reading actually flight maps because you said you wanted to ask me about flight maps. I'm like, what did I say in flight maps? That was so long ago. So I was reading it and I was like, wow, that is so different. That started out as like a really explaining in great detail with a ton of research and building up my arguments, And then I did sort of a piece called, 13 Ways of Seeing Nature in LA, which was sort of between these two. That was kind of like, okay, now it's basically about the ideas, but it's, there's a lot of detail in there. And then this one is like pure id, right? It's just like pure, it's almost solid ideas. And I only used specifics where I absolutely had to. But the main difference, I think, is the tone. So I've said, it's always been sort of like, let's think about this, whatever. And this one's just like, stop it. Just stop it already. Like, enough. We've been doing this stuff for decades and it's not doing anything. Like, stop it. So that was really hard because it's really hard to do a different tone. And I don't think maybe it is a bit more like me than, hey, let's think about this. I'm somewhere in the middle probably, but so it's also really, really hard to write something short, like super short. This started out, every single one of these sections, there's 11 reasons to stop saving the planet, then 39 ways to do it, but 11 reasons, every single one of them started out longer. I just kept cutting, like just get to the id, So it's actually really, really different. It's a bit of more of a swing, I think, than I've taken with other things I've written, and we'll see. It hasn't officially come out yet. We can't hear you, Patty.
So that if I keep that on, then I will garble your sound. So, okay, now I will garble my own sound on my own purpose. But what I love here, because I don't know that I've seen much of that in a really thought-driven book, the Scribble Zones, that the reader is sort of invited in as a co-author, write, draw, ponder, so that when you get to the action items, there's really a, come on in here, join in, take your writing instrument in hand. And so that seemed really cool. It just occurred to me that I forgot to say that the title is Stop Saving the Planet, an Environmental Manifesto, which is an Environmentalist Manifesto, which is pretty cool for saying, I know what you were thinking with the main title, but now you have to know it's an Environmentalist Manifesto. So the dynamic of that is quite cool. Could you tell this audience, in speaking of brevity, which you just said, why should people stop saving the planet?
Oh, wow. Okay. So basically what I say is we have to stop thinking about how to save the environment as this world out there that's not human, which is how we feel. Like, if it's actually really bizarre to say, oh, the way we're going to stop climate change is we're going to save the environment. Like, that doesn't really make sense. And we need to start thinking about how we change environments, because, and I say that the most important questions, if your climate change is keeping you up all night, or any of these other massive environmental crises we have now, the Earth is one big, huge hot mess at this point, right? The two most important questions you could possibly ask aren't first and foremost how to save anything. It's how do we change environments to create our stuff, right? All the stuff, every single thing in this room is made out of environment. And how do we change environments to create wealth? It's those two questions, right? That our lives are foundationally environmental. Our economy is foundationally environmental. Forget it. I just say bullshit in the book. The Norton editor kept asking, is it okay if I, kept asking her superior, like, is it okay that she says bullshit? Is it okay that she says, So, this is what we need to focus on, right? I know the bullshit that somehow we have to balance the needs of the economy and the environment. It's silly, right? Our economy is foundationally environmental. It's how we change environments to provide our needs and wants, and how we distribute the benefits and the costs. So what I do is I say that, by and large, let me see if I can just cut to the chase. Save the planet environmentalism has been great for affluent Americans who want to care about the environment and think that they're doing something, but basically want to keep benefiting the most, contributing the most, and suffering the least from how we change environments atrociously badly to create our health and our wealth and our stuff. And that if you look at the most popular ways that we're trying to beat back climate change or trying to, handle plastics or anything else, that almost none of them seriously and substantially challenge our industrial and economic practices. So I look at the emphasis on, individual virtuous planet saving, which is also like super annoying, as we all know. And I look at, how it supports greenwashing, and it makes greenwashing work, and how I look at runaway green consumerism. And then I have to say one more thing, that 3 of the 11 reasons to stop saving the planet are because everyone hates environmentalists. So a lot of it is, why do people hate them? Why does everyone hate? I think it's very, very easy to explain why wealthy right-wing folks hate environmentalists. But it's much harder to explain. It's actually not that hard, but it should be harder to explain why, why lower income folks hate environmentalists. So
that was great. Thank you so much for that. And
sugar crashing, so I'm just gonna have a little chocolate.
Oh, please. What a wonderful thing to have chocolate. There is a consumer good that we want probably to have more of on that. But I think it is really going to be an incredibly great spectator sport to watch this book go out into the world. And how great of W.W. Norton, which would be a whole other interesting thing, but I'm not going to ask that, because we want to make sure that you rant, because you have referred to ranting as something that you do some of in this book and in other modes. You can rant now, or we can go hand over to Matt and go back to flight patterns, and let's save ranting. Okay, let's just say
I can read a rant, like a minute-long rant.
Right. Alrighty. Okay. So if you're okay with that, Matt, we'll just go into ranting, and then you're off to flight patterns after that.
So this is the second of the 3. Oh, do you want me to rant? Okay, so this is the second of the 3 reasons that say everyone hates environmentalists. So where I talk about living in, sort of seeing all this from the perspective of living in Southeast LA, which is one of the most devastating, sort of environmentally devastated areas in the country. In other words, if you live and or work in Southeast LA, in and next to the factories and freeways and waste sites, you bear the brunt dramatically and disproportionately of how we as a society change environments wildly badly to sustain the goods-intensive, consumer-oriented, growth-dependent, profit-maximizing global economy. And yet environmentalists tell you incessantly that all humans are destroying the environment everywhere. And not just that, but apparently you can save the planet if you buy tons of expensive green stuff that you mostly can't afford. And not just that, but all these hybrid SUVs and toxic-free carpets and organic GMO-free sour gummy bears are cleaning up other people's kids' homes and bodies in affluent neighborhoods that are generally far less polluted than yours. And not just that, but all this SUV driving and gummy bear eating is accompanied by a never-ending greener-than-thou drumbeat about how supremely virtuous environmentalists and their kids are because they buy and use all this stuff you can't afford. And not just that, but the energy waste and other high-polluting companies who can't seem to figure out how not to dump devastating toxics into your communities likewise cavil incessantly about how ultra-virtuous they are because of their shiny new state-of-the-art LEED Platinum HQs with high-tech air filters and bike parking and low-flow toilets and rooftop solar panels. And not just that, but you and your kids who all suffer from asthma or just not so virtuous apparently, you're part of the problem, not the solution, because you're not buying tons of green stuff you can't afford to save the environment from humans everywhere. I'm almost done. You, amid the diesel fumes and smokestacks and Brobdingnagi and port cranes and freeways and Superfund sites and landfills and the just everyday toxic dumps that make this global economy, which by all means includes the supernova Hosanna shouting green consumer economy, possible. Here in Southeast LA, a lot of the Save the Planet frenzy looks like silly, elitist, ridiculous nonsense. It looks self-indulgent, blind, hypocritical, often callous, and just spectacularly clueless. A lot of it is just outright farcical. You know, it'd be funny, except it's not. And if you're watching and experiencing all this from the Niger Delta, where BP, Shell, and or Exxon has virtually destroyed the air, water, and land in the process of extracting oil and gas and has made your communities wholly unlivable, it just seems Kafka-level batshit. How's that for an
That was something. That was something.
Okay.
As a transition to the next topic, I realized that I do have a popular culture thing that I'd like a quick comment on, and then we'll get to the flight patterns fast. So Kurt, if you were available, Kurt, could you show us the cover of Parade magazine this week for Earth Day week or Earth Week Day? So if Kurt, I think, yes, here we go. Get ready to comment here. This is the cover of Parade magazine, and it's right here. And I don't know what kind. It's not a pink flamingo. I can tell that. I don't know what kind of bird it is. Or was it a European white stork? Apparently, but it is in plastic, which is an interesting thing. And the headline is "How to Help Before It's Too Late: 5 Ways to Help the Planet Today." So it is such a counter statement to your book. It just knocked me over that this is Sunday's Parade magazine. So would you comment on this bird in plastic, and does this make you feel all the more motivated to plunge in, or does it make you think, oh man, how do we start? And then after that, it will be it'll be up here briefly until you finish commenting on it, and then Matt will go into talking about flight patterns. So what do you think about this thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's tragic. It's heartbreaking, but this bird isn't the problem. The problem is that we're dumping 350 million, I think, or is it billion? I should have looked that up. Tons of plastic, new plastic, into the world every year. And it's going to be, they say that by 2050 at this rate, it'll be more plastic than fish in the ocean. So it's a really, really big problem, and you can't solve it from your kitchen. Sorry, it's not easy. There aren't 5 easy ways you can solve it from your kitchen. It's going to require massive economic, changes to our industrial and economic practices. It's going to require, massively changing over to green industrial practices, and it's going to require, first and foremost, and most importantly, insisting that that the engine of our economy cannot be maximizing profits. Because when you have an economy, I mean, this is me not knowing much about economics, but being kind of the emperor has no clothes and the kid, saying it's when economy that maximizes profits and growth in order to maximize profits will never, ever, ever, ever maximize anything else. It will never maximize anything. You cannot use carbon trading. You cannot use runaway green consumerism. You cannot use offsets or carbon markets of any kind. So you cannot, green growth, none of this is going to ever do much, to save the planet. So I would say, no, you can't you can't do all that for your kitchen. So, I try to think of ways in the 39 ways. I actually have one that's kind of a joke, which is all the ones that you might read in the other lists, like change your light bulbs, use less water, whatever. That's one of the 39 ways, and just kind of lists them all. But the others, I try to think about ways to change social change instead of individual change. To the degree that I talk about individual actions, it's like change the way that you move money around to the degree that you can, which, you have to have a certain amount of money to be able to change the way that you move money around. But to the degree that you can, pay more attention to how you create wealth than to what you use it to buy or to how you give it away. And then a lot of the 39 ways are just like ways of knowing and how to rethink environment and economy and ambitious and efficiency and to think bigger and not blame individuals instead of, thinking about systemic problems. So nice. Is that yours, Patty?
This has been in the Center of the American West offices for more than 2 decades, I think. And I thought this is a special guest who, a long running Center of the American West affiliate who I just thought should appear briefly, and then it's now Matt's.
That's great. So a cameo by the Pink Flamingo. So what's interesting to me, and as different as this new book is in so many ways, in form, in tone, in intent, from Flight Maps, as a reader, it's very easy to draw a pretty straight line between the two. Flight Maps is a more conventional, or maybe a more conventional, unconventional cultural history, including a chapter on pink flamingos, hence our guest. A chapter on, for those younger folks on the call, there used to be these things called shopping malls. And in those shopping malls, there used to be a store called the Nature Company. But this is a cultural history of, taking things like that as objects of study, but founded really on the same principle as this new book. That is that humans, or at least in this society and culture, we see nature as something that's out there and that is totally distinct from human activity, and that's something humans need to act on. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, first, just the genesis of that project, the genesis of Flight Maps, but then how you, as the author, understand the relationship between these two books that are separated by almost 30 years, 25 years or so?
Right. So I'll just start with the first, just to say again, I'm apparently a one idea, writer and scholar. But I would say that it is rooted really autobiographically, that, and this is something that, again, one of the reasons why Bill Cronin and I were such a good fit, that I think he had a kind of similar autobiography, that when I went to grad school, like I said, I didn't really know why. I really couldn't explain why I was so blown away by history. It just seemed to be explaining things in the world in a really, really powerful way, but I couldn't really articulate what that was yet. And so, I tell people, like, never go to graduate school because it'll just totally ruin you, right? I mean, and I lost my religion when that first year in graduate school, because, I thought, well, I'm going to study environmental history. That makes the most sense for me. And I'd always been a nature girl from day one. And my religion was wilderness, and always had been, and that had been enormously important to me for my entire young and then young adult life. I mean, I was actually fairly old when I went to graduate school. I was in my late 20s. So I literally lost my religion at that first year, because I was like, oh, wait, it's not that nature just is the source of truth and authenticity. Like, that's actually an idea that works for a particular place in time, and for particular even people in that particular place in time. And so it's actually a great question, Matt. I really appreciate it, because Flight Maps just comes directly out of trying to wrestle with that after losing my religion, and trying to kind of understand it, make amends, be more effective in terms of, my environmental work. So it was really, but it was a very, very confusing year in a lot of ways, because I was really trying to work through that. And, it's like when I said, with this book, it's, I don't necessarily expect to persuade people. I just want to kick up conversation, because it's like, this idea about environment is so deeply rooted. It's arguably the most deeply rooted cultural assumption that so many Americans have. So, and I know when I've taught, when I taught for Bill, when I taught for Howard Lamar, when I've taught my own courses, it's extremely difficult to get kids to think differently, though it's getting a little easier because young people now, I think, are more flexible thinkers. So I think Flight Maps is so autobiographical, and it's really about baby boomer, sort of affluent baby boomer attachments to nature. And I'll just say, just to end with it, I wrote that book, and then this was my dissertation. I only spent about a month to revise it. So I really did write it as a trade book. And my good friend, Michael Goldberg, who I'm sure a lot of folks out there know, who sadly is no longer with us, but my good friend, Michael, who I had always relied on for feedback, and was really influential in helping me write Flight Maps. And he said, well, this is interesting, but I mean, so what? And what he meant was, okay, I've got this argument in here that this is a really problematic way of thinking about nature, and it means that you get to ignore how we're changing environments in here, and you get to ignore most of how we actually change environments to create pretty much everything, our economy, our cities, or whatever. And I feel like the entire rest of my career has been an attempt to answer Michael's so what question, so that if you look at 13 Ways of Seeing Nature in LA, and then you look at Stop Saving the Planet, or, they're much more so what oriented, they're much more kind of practical and down to earth, they're applied. much more, overtly applied. Because to me, that's why I do it, is the so what question.
I want to.
Sometimes you make a difference and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, I want to come back to 13 Ways of Seeing for a second. But first, I just am curious if you remember the process of assembling what became the archive for flight maps. Like, I mean, plastic pink flamingos, like it totally works. That chapter is so exciting. But how did you come up with that? And maybe as important, what ends up on the cutting room floor in a project like that? Like, what are some of the objects of study that you discarded?
That I'm not sure I remember. I remember originally it was going to be about birds. And I remember actually in my dissertation proposal defense, which was like by far the low point of my graduate career, and Fabian saying, no, it's about birdness. I think it's about birdness. And by that time I kept saying, no, actually, I don't think it's about birdness. I can see why you would think that, because like this proposal is a mess. But I remember with Pink Flamingos, which really became the crucial chapter, is the central chapter. And I think it's the most important chapter. And it surprised me. But at the same time, I remember I was in this house I lived in graduate school. And I remember Phil Deloria was staying with us for some reason. I think I don't know, they were in between houses or something. So Phil was there. Well, I know a lot of you folks know Phil. And I remember just looking out, and our landlord had, we had this old rambly, breezy beach house, freezing beach house in New Haven, or outside New Haven. And I remember looking out there and seeing the pink flamingos that the landlord had. And I'd sort of been trying to think about dissertation topic. And I thought, I'd already written about passenger pigeons and bird hats actually for research papers. And I thought, that's interesting. That's, how when you just get, everybody knows this feeling, you just get this instinct and you don't know why yet, but you're like, I think that's interesting. I have absolutely no idea why, but I think, and that happened to me with the LA River when I moved out to LA. First time I saw the LA River, I was like, there's something to this, like this is important. So, and then you have to catch up with yourself and figure out why, your subconscious thinks it's interesting, right? But I also felt like, why would people take the trouble to do these things with pink flamingos, right? It's like, I quickly found out that people were backpacking with pink flamingos. Well, I used to backpack before I destroyed my knee, and you don't take a kernel of rice that you don't have to take when you're backpacking, right? You are so obsessive about keeping the weight down, and people were putting plastic flamingos on top of their backpacks and carting them into the wilderness for 10, 12 days. And I'm like, that's a meaningful object. Like that's a meaningful object, why would, if people are doing that. So and then started down this. And then once I had the pink flamingo, I was just really interested in just seems like most of our encounters with nature aren't with real flamingos. It's a 700-to-1 ratio, right? It's with images, it's with objects, it's with, all this stuff, bric-a-brac, it's with our calendars. So I was just really, really curious about what all that meant without really having any answers to that yet.
Yeah.
That's kind of a
Thank
long
you.
answer.
We're going to have to wrap up fairly soon, but can you just spend a minute or two just on that intermediate point, the 13 ways of seeing, and maybe how you think of that as the kind of the so whatness of what you were trying to do?
Yeah. So, and I was, like I say, I think I realized when I went back to read flight maps that my work is increasingly just about it, the ideas, and less and less of the infrastructure, the stuff. So I was going to originally write a book about Los Angeles, and I wrote this in order to think about that book, and then realized, I've just written what I wanted to write. So 13 Ways of Seeing Nature in LA, it's really about trying to think about that idea of nature as being out there and the ways in which it has shaped cities, and the ways in which it's prevented us from understanding how we make cities. And it's made cities really, really unsustainable. So I looked at LA, which is, this is a city that forgot that that no longer thought it had a river, which still ran 52 miles through the heart of the Los Angeles area. And yet everybody said, what's the LA River? We don't have a river. So it was kind of like, this is a city that's an extreme example of losing track of nature. And here are the consequences, which have been really, really steep for Los Angeles. And then I centered that. And what I did was I framed it as a critique of nature writing, but ultimately it wasn't really nearly as much about nature writing and a call for a new kind of nature writing as it really was about trying to understand the so whatness of when you think about nature like this. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Patty, I'll throw you the mic.
Yeah. So I have a couple of things where I will quote from you and then ask for you to not rant. The ranting was great, or rant if you prefer. But you do say on your website, it says, as a writer, she has tried to challenge how Americans think about environment, economy, public space, guns in Los Angeles. So I would not go particularly after those topics, given the little time that we have now. But could you give advice to historians on how to challenge how Americans think? Because I love our profession. I just have so many people I'm fans of, but I'm not sure that this is always our greatest gift of how to challenge how Americans think. So could you just say one or two best management practices, to use a sort of corporate language, I guess, but just how to go about challenging how Americans think in a way that doesn't just cause them to get pissed off and storm away?
I mean, gosh, that's such a huge question, right? You would probably be a much better person to answer that, honestly. But, you've spent your whole career doing that as well. But I think, first principle is there needs to be some instruction in graduate school for how to communicate, right? Even within academia. So when I was there was I was lucky. I ended up doing one of my oral fields. John Demos just very graciously agreed to do it with me on writing history. So that was enormously helpful for me to think about. Actually, that was really, really foundational for me. But, there was no formal instruction on how to write, how to teach, or how to give a talk. Mm-hmm. And those are the three ways that scholars communicate. Now, I think that's changing to some degree, but there are also still departments that have zero instruction on any of those things. So let's think about how we communicate. I know here at Washington University, the Center for the Humanities, they're really trying to rethink and trying to incorporate, these kinds of skills into graduate training. There's this assumption that somehow you're just supposed to be able to magically explain your ideas, but communication, it's a set of skills, it's craft. And so that's the other thing I would say is, I don't think everyone needs to write for people outside academia. I don't like the phrase general audience, because there's no such thing. You're always writing for specific audiences. So Stop Saving the Planet is for specific audiences in particular. But, if you want to do it, then you need to do two things. You need to be accessible so people can understand what you're saying, and you need to be engaging so that you can pull people in. And there's not some kind of like magic lightning bolt that allows you to be a writer who does that. It's making a set of decisions about voice and language and rhythm. I think there's sometimes scholars sit down and say, I'm going to write for a general audience, but there's no real systematic thinking that goes into how one does that. I would say even when scholars write for their colleagues, they don't always sit down. I think the first question that anybody has to ask, regardless of what kind of communication you're doing and what format, is who is my audience and what are they going to care about and what are they bringing to this, so that I can engage them and I can connect with them and I can speak their language before I speak a different one, That's totally so, those are kind of obvious things, really. And having chosen not to be an academic for a living, I feel like if I had stayed in academia, that would have been a fight that I really wanted to take on. But I felt like, given that I chose not to, it's not my fight. It's not really legitimate for me to pursue that fight. And I was happy to lend my, I've given some writing workshops for humanities graduate students. Folks ask me.
Well, we're totally eager and ready to co-opt you as one of our teammates in this So that is concluded. But I want just one quick more quotation, and this would be the concluding thing. On your bio, it says on your website, she argues fanatically for the superpowers of the arts and humanities. So for just the last minute or two, could you argue fanatically for the superpowers of the arts and humanities?
Yeah, I mean, good luck doing anything about climate change without the humanities. I mean, I really think of them as superpowers. I have, as you know, I have a project where I have this Yiddishy rant called Shtim, which is in defense of the humanities and critique of the fetishization of STEM and also of STEAM, because how insulting is that when they decided to revise STEM to include, non-sciencey things, that they completely left out the humanities and they just added the arts, right? Which a lot of scientists think includes the humanities. A lot of scientists think that humanities is the social sciences, right? But it's not. And superpowers, as we all know, have these, humanities, as we all know, have every field has superpowers. And the superpowers of humanities, at heart, I'm a history geek, even though I chose not to stay in academia, that's how I think. And it's like, it's about, why people do what they do and think what they think. We have superpowers for answering that question. We understand how people think with stories. We understand how to ask how people do that in a particular place and time. Are, the first sentence that, like, the historian's motto is, it's more complicated, right? Which complicates the kind of models that social scientists and scientists have in really, really important ways. I think there's just absolutely no way. And I think a lot of people have been saying this with COVID, right? They've said, oh, look, now we see it's not just about science. At the same time, COVID has kind of encouraged us to fetishize science even more, I think, as a way of knowing. So one of the 39 ways, actually, in Stop Saving the Planet is called STEAMs, which includes all of those fields and puts in a particular plug for the humanities. It says that. Yeah, and again, Patty, I feel like you're the person to ask that question, we should be asking that question because if anybody's done applied history, it's you.
And one person who has is Thompson Smith, who is in our group here. Boy, has he ever done applied history. And he has an interesting question that we're going to carry over to our next section. Anyone who would like to join us, there's information on the chat about how to find us in our Zoom room.
It's on the Q&A.
It's on the Q&A. Oh, that's what it's called. It's called the Q&A, not called it's called the chat. Anyway, so I'm going to have Kurt join us in a second. Oh, he's gone. He's over there at the room. So join us at the Zoom room. If everyone is aware of where that is, great. If not, I guess write me a message at patricia.limerick@centerwest.org and I will direct you there. And the first question that we'll start with there is going to be from Thompson about whether you know about the Mapping Indigenous Los Angeles project from UCLA, and if that is a match and is compatible. And the way that you were smiling suggests to me that the answer is going to be very positive on that one. So the thing I do, as everyone knows, what I don't like about Zoom, I like lots of things about Zoom. I do not like the fact that standing ovation is not viable on Zoom, because if we all stand up, then, well, actually you would get to see these nice horses. That would be good. The horses on my shirt are worth seeing, but we can't do a standing ovation. So you will return to Boulder and we'll do that standing ovation, and we'll do it twice because we couldn't do it this time. So Jenny, thank you so much. And we'll see you soon in our Zoom room.
Okay.
Bye. Bye. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.